morning, everyone. Before we get started, I just want to thank everyone for coming out. We appreciate the good turnout. And we especially want to thank the representatives, partners from the Big Four accounting firms to be here. We really appreciate their presence. And before we get started, I want to briefly introduce our team. My name is John Grant. To my right is Martin Garcia. Over here is Casey Morrison. And in the back here is Dan Newell. The entire case study, as you guys have heard already, generally basically centered around DrugCo Incorporated, a pharmaceutical company which was looking to implement an ERP, or Enterprise Resource Planning system, IT system. The BFAC, or Big Four Accounting and Consulting, was retained to evaluate the proposed system implementation and to basically give their own recommendations on the ERP system implementation. Our job was then, in turn, to basically look at the BFAC study, that look at their recommendations and make some of our own evaluations.
Now, I'd like to briefly discuss what an ERP system actually does. Now, an ERP system is an IT-based system that helps a company to manage their resources, helps to connect the different parts of the business, and it also helps to automate different business functions.
But before we really got into the nitty-gritty details of the ERP system, we thought it would be very important for everyone to get a basic picture of the way the pharmaceutical industry works, because that really affects the way that the ERP system is going to be configured and maintained. Especially because the pharmaceutical industry operates in something of a unique way. Whereas with most industries, you have your manufacturers, which send goods or whatever to the retail store or the provider, which gives it to the end consumer. With the pharmaceutical industry in particular, you have the presence of a middleman, in particular that of GPOs, or group purchasing organizations, which play a critical role in the process because what they do is they basically end up buying drugs in bulk from the provider, such as DrugCo, or the manufacturer, which in then turn give the drugs to their member providers, such as hospitals or pharmacies, which in turn give it to the end patient.
Now, this triangle helps to graphically display the uses of an ERP system. Now, the idea is that the ERP system has to support the DrugCo's goal of making a profit, as well as complementing the organizational strategy of what employees have, which powers, etc.
Now, whereas with the original documentation of the case study, there weren't a lot of details about what the previous IT system that they were using was, or they didn't specifically talk about the old system very much. But just from looking at the potential benefits of the ERP system and reviewing the documentation that was provided, there are several potential reasons for the proposal were readily identifiable. In particular, starting with the concept of security and segregation of duties, or SOD. The ERP system would go a long way in promoting the security of that data by ensuring that certain people don't have access to data that they shouldn't. This helps protect the integrity of the data, prevent things like fraud, while at the same time segregating duties to ensure there's not overlapping of job responsibilities and duplication of work and a lot of things like that. Next, the ERP system would also provide tremendous advantages in the area of human error and accuracy of the data. Because one of the main advantages of ERP is the way it automates a lot of basic business functions to take a lot of the human error out of some of those functions, which will only serve to make the data more accurate and protect the integrity of that data. Kind of on the same line, so to speak, somewhat associated with that is the issue of discrepancies. Because whenever there are a lot of those little mistakes like that, what tends to happen is it will sometimes cause conflict in between different departments and whatnot, especially with management. So it will really help to eliminate and cut down on those as well. But furthermore, ERP also offers tremendous advantages when it comes to internal cooperation. Based on the way ERP integrates a lot of key business functions, it significantly increases the opportunities for internal cooperation, increased communication, and really increases efficiency within the operations of the company. And then finally, this would serve to make DrugCo much more competitive in the way, like I said before, how it integrates all those business functions by having a system which operates much more smoothly, brings all arms of the business together. It increases their ability to move quicker and to access new markets, new sectors, and to move quicker, whether it be opening a new product line, so on and so forth.
Vice President of Finance is going to have some specific concerns about this ERP system. First and most importantly, he's going to want the ERP system to give him very accurate and up-to-date financial information. Next, he's going to want the ERP system to aid him in some of the decision-making processes. And finally, he's going to want to make sure that the company as a whole is getting accurate and financial data, or else the whole company could be crippled. Also, before BFAC enters into an agreement with DrugCo, they have to make sure certain engagement assumptions are covered. This will help BFAC to avoid any future legal problems, as well as letting DrugCo know exactly what services they'll be provided with. Now, I'm not going to go over all these in detail, but just to cover a couple important ones. One is that BFAC must be notified of any changes to the ERP system, and another one is that DrugCo is the one that will be assigning roles within the system.
Now, obviously, the management of DrugCo is going to have some significant responses to the BFAC findings, especially since they requested their report. But I'd like to chiefly identify the way a couple of the different members of management are going to respond in somewhat of unique ways as it relates to their job responsibilities. In particular, the VP of Finance is going to respond because he is primarily concerned with the accuracy of the financial data. His name goes on those reports, so he's very, he has a lot of responsibility in that regard. And as a result, his chief response is that he'll work very closely with the CIO, or Chief Information Officer, to ensure that the ERP system is implemented in a way which follows the financial reporting requirements and so on and so forth. In a similar manner, the CIO, or Chief Information Officer, will be directly overseeing the nitty-gritty details, nuts and bolts of the ERP implementation, both implementation and oversight and upkeep later on. But he'll work through those configuration, that implementation, as a result from input both from finance as well as from internal audit. Their input is critical in this entire implementation process. And then finally, the head of internal audit will ensure that the BFAC recommendations are followed, as well as ensure that the business processes are performing as expected, as well as keeping in mind legal requirements, especially as it relates to SOX, or Sarbanes-Oxley 404 compliance, which we'll talk about a little bit later. But one thing you may especially want to do is, throughout that entire implementation process, is use technical experts or application specialists to either be attached to teams within the company or actually train the staff on how to use the new ERP system. Because unless that occurs, misuse of the system could easily occur, and you really won't see the advantages that could come from the system. Now, the next thing I want to talk about is some of the specific BFAC recommendations. Now, I realize not everyone in the room is going to have an extensive information systems or IT background, so I won't try to get too complicated. But just to touch on a couple of these. For example, some of the configuration recommendations dealt with order to cash. Starting off at the top, the tracking of price overrides. What this would do is, by tracking some of the price overrides that would occur within the sales and customer service departments, it would really help to ensure that they offer consistent discounts to GPOs and so on and so forth, so to increase their quality, their quality of their customer service. Next, the one recommendation was the linking of credit memos directly to sales orders, and this will tremendously help, especially because of the significant role that chargebacks have in the role they play in the pharmaceutical industry. When you have with the role of the group purchasing organizations kind of serving as middlemen, when you offer discounts and then they end up having to sell their drugs at a lower price than they received them for, you have to deal with chargebacks back to DrugCo. And as a result, linking those chargebacks, credit memos directly to sales orders, would help tremendously in tracking those. Next, under procure to pay, by linking the purchase orders to match the goods received to invoices received, by linking them on a chain to make accounting for them much easier and really account for all the steps really in the business cycle. Next, under inventory management and warehouse management, one of the recommendations was to restrict changes on manual account assignment, basically to prevent people that shouldn't be accessing certain data from changing information without getting management approval. The next recommendation dealt with cycle count frequency, which changing it from 6 times a year for 100% of the population to 12 times a year for 50% of the population. So in terms of recording the inventory within a warehouse or within their inventory, whenever they would want to look at that data, they would look at a more up-to-date picture whenever they would want to look at it at a specific given time. And then finally, the recommendation on fixed assets, specifically on the modification of the values of useful life. Basically, it's basically restricting the access to something like this unless people have management approval. And this is especially important just because, especially when they want to account for something like this, depreciation and whatnot of those fixed assets for tax purposes, as well as the expenditures for the replacement of assets.
Now, the BFAC report overall does a good job in addressing some of the problems facing the implementation of an ERP system. The executive summary actually highlights and specifies a few of these advantages. For example, they have automation of processes, and it identifies control options. If I go to the next slide here, we'll see that the BFC also covers cash flow, inventory, and sensitive access violations. One of the major advantages is the post-implementation risk, which will help the managers of drug co down the line identify like certain risks or problems they'll face in the future. Okay, some of the cons. Now, one of the problems with the report was that the segregation of duty violations, and there was many of them, and there was no recommendations on how to address these violations. And lastly, the amount of violations that occurred, there was a heavy number of tests that were failed, as Casey will explain in this next one.
Now what you want to do is you want to take a look at the blue line that we have up there. The blue line represents the total amount of access tests performed. The red line represents the violations that happened during it. As you can see, it's a significant percentage of it. Also, in almost every test performed, there were violations present. This isn't quite what a company is looking for in regards to sensitive access or in segregation of duties. Now, in segregation of duties, the ratio isn't quite as bad. I mean, there are still violations in every one, which is not quite what you're looking for, but it's a little bit better. Now, our additional reports come in place because the BFAC did a very good job, but we felt that there were some improvements or possibilities that could have been made on top of that. Firstly, we have the role-based matrix. What that's going to do is that's going to designate specific roles to individuals within a company or create new ones, whatever is needed in that particular case. Next, we have a support module. That creates a chain of individuals that can go for assistance if there's an issue or something. That is called a RACI model. For every issue, we find someone that's responsible, accountable, consulted, and informed on every single problem. Finally, we have a cost-benefit analysis. We're going to analyze which one of those SOD conflicts, which one of those sensitive access violations, what's worth fixing, what can we do. Some are crucial, some are not going to be crucial. So some are actually worth our time, maybe hiring new employees or firing an employee or whatever needs to be done. And then as John had mentioned earlier, we have an accountability area based on the three management. First, the VP of North American Finance. He's obviously concerned with the financial data, and he wants to make sure that the ERP implementation is conformed to those specific financials. Next, we have the CIO. He's more concerned with the technical aspect, the IT, and he wants to make sure that all the assignment and roles are in place for the ERP. Finally, you have the head of internal audit. He's going to audit the departments and also take a look at the segregation of duties and make sure that those problems are communicated properly. Finally, who's responsible? We have three managers, all with some accountability, but we're going to place a little bit more of the accountability on the VP of Finance. He signs off on the business process, and he's the one that's mainly concerned with it. His name is actually on the sheet. If you look at the proposal, he's the one that they request correspondence from. So the BFAC report did do a good job, and it highlighted some different areas. We have detailed findings, deliverables, and the final report. In the final report, it addresses the legality of the aspect. You have the Sarbanes-Oxley section 404, which discusses internal control over the financial reporting. This is very important and can also be costly for some companies. So this is a very important area for the ERP to highlight. Next, we have the detailed findings, which is concerned more about the accounting aspect of it as regards to the balance sheets, because you have the fixed assets and depreciation, as well as the inventory management. So success in that area is crucial. Finally, we have the deliverables of the BFAC. That shows more the IT side. Using those IT assets, it's going to show improvements in sensitive access and SOD violations. And just kind of sum things up, we did a little SWOT analysis here. So we have the strengths. They followed the SOX 404 compliance, so we've got the legality again. Streamlined information sharing, which shows that the automation of the company ran effectively. We have weaknesses that you saw on the graphs before. Those violations, those are not what the company is going to be looking for. We found opportunity, however. In the pharmaceutical industry, it's a very inelastic area where it's not responsive to price changes. So competitive edge is really gained in having a better system. So the ERP implementation is going to help DrugCo in that sense. Finally, we have threats. If this whole implementation doesn't run successfully, it could be a waste of money for the company, and it just could be inefficient. Overall, we liked what the BFAC did. And I'm not just saying that because they're here now. But we liked what they did, and with our recommendations on top of that, we think it's a great proposal. If there's any questions or comments.
All right, thank you guys.
Thank you.